I wasn't supposed to notice the way Daniel held his coffee cup. Two hands wrapped around the ceramic like he was trying to keep something from slipping away. It was such a small thing, barely worth remembering, but I did. I noticed everything about him from the moment Claire brought him home for the first time. "This is my little brother Marcus," she'd said, her voice bright with the kind of happiness that made you want to protect it. "The one I told you about." He'd smiled then, not the polite smile you give to family members you're required to meet, but something genuine. "Claire talks about you all the time. The quiet one, right? The one who actually listens." I remember thinking that was an odd way to introduce yourself to someone. Most people would have said something about my job or asked what I did for fun, but Daniel seemed to understand something about me before we'd even shaken hands. That was 3 years ago. 3 years of watching my sister glow in a way I'd never seen before. 3 years of family dinners where I sat across from the man who made her laugh, who remembered her coffee order, who looked at her like she was something precious. He couldn't quite believe he was allowed to keep. 3 years of pretending I didn't memorize the sound of his voice. I was good at pretending. I'd been the good son, the reliable brother, the one who never caused drama or asked for too much. When Mom worried about Claire dating too much in college, I was the one who told her to trust Claire's judgment. When Dad had his heart attack junior year, I was the one who handled the hospital visits, the insurance calls, the careful conversations about retirement. I knew how to be what people needed me to be, and what Daniel needed me to be was his brother-in-law, nothing more. The wedding was beautiful. Claire wore our grandmother's dress, altered to fit her smaller frame but still carrying the weight of family history. Daniel stood at the altar in a navy suit that made his eyes look darker, more serious than I'd ever seen them. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, I felt my chest tighten for reasons I didn't want to examine. I was the best man because Claire had insisted. "You're the most important man in my life after Daniel," she'd said, squeezing my hand. "It wouldn't feel right without you standing up there." So I stood. I held the rings. I made a speech about how Daniel was the kind of man who deserved someone like Claire, and how lucky we all were to have him in our family. I meant every word, and that made it worse somehow. At the reception, while Claire danced with our father, Daniel found me at the bussy. "Thank you," he said, settling beside me, "for the speech, for welcoming me." "You don't need to thank me for that. You're good for her." He was quiet for a moment, watching Claire spin in Dad's arms. "She said you were the one who convinced her to give me a chance. After our second date, she wasn't sure." I hadn't known that. Claire had never mentioned any uncertainty. Why wasn't she sure? "She thought I was too quiet, too serious." He glanced at me, and I caught something in his expression I couldn't name. "She said she was used to men who filled all the silence, that she didn't know what to do with someone who was comfortable with quiet." "And what did you tell her?" "That some of the best conversations happen in the spaces between words." I felt something shift in my chest, like a door opening that should have stayed closed. She's lucky to have found someone who understands that. I hope so. He finished his drink, set the glass down carefully. "I hope I can be what she needs." There was something vulnerable in the way he said it, something that made me want to tell him he was already more than enough. But before I could find the words, Claire appeared at his elbow, flushed and radiant. "Are you two bonding over there?" she asked, sliding her arms around Daniel's waist. "Good. My two favorite men should be friends." Daniel's eyes met mine over her head. "I think we're getting there." That night, I went home to my empty apartment and tried not to think about the way he'd looked at me when he said it. Like he was measuring something. Like he was trying to solve a puzzle I didn't even know I presented. The first year of their marriage passed quietly. I saw them at family gatherings, exchanged pleasantries, played the role of supportive brother-in-law. Daniel fit into our family like he'd always been there. Mom adored him. Dad respected him. Even my Uncle Rick, who'd never approved of any of Claire's previous boyfriends, admitted that Daniel was solid. I kept my distance without making it obvious, found excuses to leave family dinners early, declined invitations to double dates that Claire half-heartedly extended knowing I was perpetually single. I wasn't avoiding him exactly. I was just being careful, but careful has its limits. The phone rang at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in March. I was grading papers at my kitchen table, red pen poised over a student's essay about Gatsby's green light. The sound cut through the quiet of my apartment like an alarm. Hello? Marcus? The voice was soft, hesitant. It's Daniel. I set down my pen, suddenly alert. Is everything okay? Is Claire? She's fine. She's sleeping. I'm sorry, I know it's late. He trailed off and I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. Can't sleep? Yeah, I've been lying there for 2 hours staring at the ceiling. I kept thinking about calling someone, but I didn't know who. A pause. Then I thought of you. I leaned back in my chair, papers forgotten. Why me? I don't know. You just seem like someone who'd understand what it's like to be awake when everyone else is sleeping. He was right. I was often up late. Not because I had to be, but because the quiet hours after midnight felt like they belonged to me in a way that daylight never did. It was when I did my best thinking, my most honest writing. When I allowed myself to feel things I kept carefully contained during regular hours. What's keeping you up? I asked. Nothing specific, everything. Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life? The question hit me unexpectedly. I thought about my job teaching high school English, which I enjoyed but hadn't exactly chosen so much as fallen into. About the apartment I rented because it was practical, not because I loved it. About the careful distance I maintained from everything that might complicate the safe, predictable existence I'd built. Sometimes, I said, I love Claire. His voice was steady, certain. I need you to know that. I do know that. But sometimes I feel like I'm playing a part, the husband, the provider, the guy who has his life figured out. He was quiet for a moment. Did you ever want something you couldn't name? I closed my eyes. Yes. What do you do with that feeling? I don't know, I'm still figuring it out. We talked for an hour about work, about books, about the way the city looked different at night. Nothing important, nothing that couldn't have been said in daylight. But there was something about his voice in the darkness, something about the intimacy of shared insomnia that made every ordinary word feel weighted with meaning. When we finally hung up, I sat in my kitchen until dawn, trying to understand what had just happened. He was my sister's husband. I wasn't supposed to know that he read poetry when he couldn't sleep, or that he sometimes drove around the city at 3 a.m. just to feel like he was moving towards something. I wasn't supposed to know that he laughed quietly when he was tired, or that his voice dropped to almost a whisper when he was saying something true. But I did know those things now, and I wanted to know more. The calls became irregular but not uncommon. Once every few weeks, sometimes less, sometimes more. Always late. Always when Claire was sleeping or out of town visiting her college roommate, or at her book club meetings that ran long. I hope I'm not bothering you, he'd always begin. You're not, I'd always answer. And I meant it. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about his job in architecture, how he'd wanted to design schools but ended up working on office buildings instead. I told him about my students, about the ones who surprised me with their insight, about the ones who reminded me why I'd started teaching in the first place. Sometimes we didn't talk much at all. He'd call and we'd sit in comfortable silence, the phone line connecting us across the sleeping city. I could hear him breathing, could picture him in his kitchen or on his porch, looking out at the same darkness I was looking at. This is weird, isn't it? He said one night in May. What? This. Us talking like this. I'd been wondering the same thing. Does it feel weird to you? No, that's what makes it weird. I understood exactly what he meant. It should have felt strange, inappropriate even, but it didn't. It felt like the most natural thing in the world, like we were having conversations we'd been meant to have for years. We could stop, I offered, not meaning it. Do you want to stop? No? Then we won't. It was that simple and that complicated. At Claire's birthday party in June, I watched Daniel work the room with the easy confidence of someone who belonged. He remembered everyone's names, asked about their jobs, their kids, their lives. He was good with people in the way that came from genuine interest rather than social obligation. But when the evening wound down and people started to leave, I found myself alone with him on my parents' back porch. Claire was inside opening the last of her gifts and laughing with our cousins. "Good party," he said, settling into the chair beside me. Claire seemed happy. She was. She loves having everyone together like this. He was quiet for a moment. "You left early last time, at Easter." I had. I'd made an excuse about grading papers, but the truth was I'd needed air, needed space away from the easy intimacy I saw between them, away from the way Daniel's laugh made something twist in my chest. I had work to catch up on. "You always have work to catch up on." He turned to look at me. "Are you avoiding me, Marcus?" The question was direct, honest. I could have deflected, made another excuse. Instead, I found myself being equally honest. Sometimes. Why? I couldn't tell him the real reason, couldn't explain that I looked forward to his late-night calls more than I looked forward to anything else in my carefully ordered life. Couldn't admit that I'd started thinking of him as mine in ways that had nothing to do with family connections. "It's complicated," I said finally. "Most worthwhile things are." We sat in silence, listening to the sound of laughter drifting through the screen door. The air was warm, heavy with the promise of summer. Daniel's presence beside me felt both comfortable and electric, like touching a live wire that somehow didn't hurt. "You ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" he said quietly. It was what he'd asked me during that first phone call. "You've asked me that before." "Have I?" He seemed genuinely surprised. "I don't remember, but I remembered everything. Every conversation, every pause, every moment when his voice had dropped to that whisper that felt like sharing secrets." "What would your life look like," I asked, "if it were really yours?" He considered this, head tilted back to look at the stars. "Quieter, maybe. More honest. Less about what people expect and more about what feels true." He glanced at me. "What about you?" "I don't know. I've never let myself think about it that way." "Maybe you should." Inside, someone started the dishwasher. Car doors slammed in the driveway as the last of the guests headed home. Soon, Daniel and Claire would leave too, and I'd go back to my apartment, and we'd return to our separate lives connected only by those midnight phone calls. "I should go help clean up," I said, starting to rise. "Marcus," his voice stopped me. When I looked back, he was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. "I'm glad we're friends." Friends. The word should have felt right, safe. Instead, it felt like a door closing on something I'd been afraid to name. "Me too," I said, and went inside. The summer passed slowly. Daniel called less frequently, and when he did, our conversations felt slightly strained, like we were both being careful not to cross lines we couldn't see but could somehow feel. In August, Claire got a promotion that required her to travel more. She was excited about the opportunity, but worried about leaving Daniel alone so much. "I feel terrible," she confided to me over lunch. "He's been so supportive, but I know he gets lonely. He's not the type to complain, but I can tell." I thought about those late-night calls, about the way Daniel's voice sounded when he said he needed to hear a voice that didn't expect anything from him. "He understands that it's important to you." "I know, that's what makes me feel worse." She stirred her salad absently. "I was thinking maybe you could check on him sometimes, when I'm gone. You two get along well." The irony wasn't lost on me. "Claire, I don't think—" "Please? It would make me feel better knowing he had family nearby. You're the only person I'd trust with this." Trust. The word hit me like a physical blow. She trusted me with her husband because she had no idea that I lay awake at night replaying the sound of his laugh. She trusted me because she thought I was the good brother, the safe choice, the one who would never complicate her happiness. "Okay," I said, "if you think it would help." "Thank you." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I love you, you know that? You're the best brother anyone could ask for." I managed to smile. "I love you too." That night, Daniel called. "Claire said she talked to you today, about checking on me while she's gone. If you'd rather I didn't—" "No, it's not that, it's just—" He paused. This is already complicated enough, isn't it? He was right. It was complicated. Every conversation, every shared silence, every moment when I caught myself thinking about him when I should have been thinking about anything else. But the alternative was pretending none of it mattered, and I wasn't sure I could do that anymore. What do you want, Daniel? The question hung between us. I could hear him breathing, could picture him in his kitchen, holding the phone like he held his coffee cup, carefully, like he was afraid of dropping something precious. I want to keep talking to you, he said finally, even when I shouldn't want that. Then we'll keep talking. It's not fair to you, or to Claire. Let me worry about what's fair to me. Another pause, then. She's leaving for Chicago on Thursday. She'll be gone until Sunday. I know. Will you? He stopped, started again. Would you want to have dinner instead of just talking on the phone? Every rational part of me knew I should say no, should make an excuse, maintain the distance I'd been trying so hard to preserve. But rationality felt thin and fragile next to the weight of months of wanting something I couldn't name. Yes, I said. We met at a small restaurant across town, the kind of place where the lighting was dim and the tables were far enough apart for private conversation. Daniel was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth studying the menu like it contained the secrets of the universe. Sorry I'm late, I said, sliding in across from him. You're not. I was early. He looked up and I caught that same expression I'd seen at Claire's birthday party, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. I've been thinking about this all day. Having second thoughts? Constantly. He smiled and some of the tension between us eased. But I'm still here. So am I. We ordered food, made small talk about work and weather and the city council's latest controversy. Normal conversation, the kind we might have had at any family gathering. But there was an undercurrent of awareness, a sense that we were both hyper-conscious of every word, every glance, every moment when our hands accidentally brushed reaching for water glasses. This is strange, Daniel said as we waited for dessert we'd both claimed not to want but had ordered anyway. Good strange or bad strange? I don't know yet. He leaned back against the booth. I keep thinking Claire would like this place. She'd order the chocolate cake and insist on sharing it even though she always eats most of it herself. The mention of my sister should have felt like a reminder of why this was wrong. Instead, it felt like an acknowledgement of why it was complicated. We both loved Claire, that wasn't in question, but there was something else here, something that existed in the spaces between family obligations and social expectations. You miss her when she travels, I said. I do, but I also... He stopped, shook his head. Never mind. You can say it. I also feel like I can breathe differently when she's gone, like I don't have to be quite so much what she needs me to be. He looked at me directly. Does that make me terrible? It makes you human. Sometimes I think you're the only person who would say that. The waitress brought our cake, chocolate like Daniel had predicted Claire would order. We ate it in companionable silence, and I found myself thinking about all the meals I'd eaten alone in my apartment, all the evenings I'd spent grading papers or reading or doing anything to fill the quiet hours. This felt different, not just because I wasn't alone, but because I was with someone who understood the value of shared silence, who didn't feel the need to fill every pause with words. I should probably get going, I said when we'd finished. Probably, but neither of us moved. The restaurant was mostly empty now, just a few other couples lingering over coffee and conversation. We could have stayed there all night, I thought, could have talked until sunrise the way we did on the phone, letting the darkness hide the things we weren't ready to admit in daylight. Instead, Daniel signaled for the check. Outside, the night air was cool, carrying the first hint of autumn. We walked slowly toward our cars, neither of us eager to end the evening. Thank you, Daniel said when we reached the parking lot. For dinner, for listening. Thank you for asking me. We stood there for a moment, caught in the strange space between ending the evening and not wanting to let it go. In the distance, I could hear traffic, the hum of the city settling into its nighttime rhythm. Marcus, Daniel said, his voice softer than usual, what are we doing? It was the question I'd been avoiding for months, the one that demanded honesty I wasn't sure either of us was ready for. I don't know, I said, but I don't want to stop. He nodded like that was exactly what he'd expected me to say. Neither do I. We got in our separate cars and drove away in different directions. But I felt connected to him still, like there was an invisible thread stretching across the city, linking us in ways that had nothing to do with family or obligation or the careful roles we'd learned to play. That night, the phone didn't ring. I stayed up anyway, grading papers and thinking about the way Daniel had looked at me when he'd asked what we were doing, like he was hoping I had answers he couldn't find on his own. I didn't have answers, but I had questions that felt more urgent with each passing day, questions about what it meant to want something you couldn't name, to care about someone in ways that didn't fit the neat categories the world provided. Questions about what happened when the safe, predictable life you'd built started to feel like a cage. Claire came back from Chicago on Sunday evening, full of stories about her successful meetings and the clients she'd impressed. Daniel picked her up from the airport, and they went to dinner to celebrate. I know because she called to tell me about it, her voice bright with the kind of happiness that made me remember why I'd always tried to protect it. "Daniel missed me so much," she said, laughing. "He barely let me out of his sight all evening. It was actually kind of sweet." I made appropriate responses, asked the right questions, played the role of interested brother, but I was thinking about the way Daniel had looked at me in the restaurant parking lot, the weight of unasked questions hanging between us. 2 days later, he called. "I can't stop thinking about dinner," he said without preamble. "Neither can I." "This is dangerous, isn't it?" "Yes." "But you don't want to stop either." "No." We were past the point of pretending this was just friendship, just innocent conversations between family members. We were something else now, something that didn't have a name but felt more real than most of the named relationships in my life. "I need to see you again," Daniel said. "Not for dinner, just somewhere we can talk." "When?" "Tomorrow? Claire's working late." I knew I should say no, should recognize that we were approaching a line that, once crossed, would change everything. But I also knew that I'd been moving toward this moment for months, maybe since that first night he'd called, maybe since the moment we'd shaken hands at Claire's introduction. "Where?" "There's a park near my office, Meridian Heights. Do you know it?" "I'll find it." 7 o'clock? "I'll be there." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and tried to imagine explaining this to Claire. Tried to picture telling her that her husband and I had been talking for months, that we'd had dinner together, that we were meeting in parks like teenagers hiding from their parents. I couldn't imagine it. Couldn't see any way to make this sound innocent or explainable. Because it wasn't innocent, even though nothing had happened, it was the wanting that made it dangerous. The way I thought about him when I should have been thinking about other things. The way his voice in the darkness felt more intimate than physical touch. The way I was already planning what to wear tomorrow, like this was a date instead of whatever it actually was. Meridian Heights turned out to be a small park tucked between residential neighborhoods, the kind of place where people brought their dogs or jogged in the evenings. By 7 o'clock, it was mostly empty except for a few dedicated runners making their final loops. I found Daniel sitting on a bench near a pond that reflected the last light of the day. He looked up when I approached, and I saw my own nervous energy reflected in his expression. "You came," he said. "Did you think I wouldn't?" "I hoped you would, but I wasn't sure." He moved over to make room on the bench. "I've been sitting here for 20 minutes trying to figure out what to say to you." "And did you figure it out?" "No." I sat down beside him close enough to smell his cologne, to feel the warmth of his presence. The pond was still, disturbed only by the occasional duck swimming across its surface. "This is nice," I said. "Peaceful. I come here sometimes after work, when I need to think." "What do you think about?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Lately, you." The admission hung between us like a challenge. I could deflect it, change the subject, pretend I didn't understand what he meant. Instead, I found myself being equally honest. "I think about you, too." "What do we do with that?" It was the same question he'd asked on the phone, but it felt different now, more urgent. Sitting this close to him, I could see the way his hands rested on his knees, could count the freckles on his forearms where his sleeves were rolled up. I don't know, I said. I've never been in this situation before. Neither have I. He turned to look at me directly. I love Claire. I need you to know that. But there's something about you, Marcus. Something that makes me feel like I can be honest in ways I can't with anyone else. Even with her? Especially with her. She needs me to be steady, reliable. The man who has his life figured out. And most of the time, I can be that. But sometimes I feel like I'm suffocating under the weight of being what everyone expects. I understood that feeling intimately. The careful performance of being the good son, the supportive brother, the teacher who had it all together, the way authenticity could feel like a luxury you couldn't afford. What would happen if you stopped performing? I don't know. That's what scares me. A jogger passed by, earbuds in, lost in her own world. Normal people doing normal things while Daniel and I sat on a park bench trying to navigate territory neither of us had mapped before. Can I ask you something? Daniel said. Of course. Have you ever been in love? The question caught me off guard. Why do you ask? Because I'm trying to understand what this is, what I'm feeling. I thought about the relationships I'd had over the years, nice women mostly, a few that had gotten serious enough to involve meeting parents, talking about future plans, but none that had felt like this. Like recognizing something essential in another person, like finding a piece of yourself you didn't know was missing. I thought I had been, I said finally. But looking back, I think I was just going through the motions, doing what I thought I was supposed to do. And now? Now I think I understand the difference. He nodded slowly. Claire was my first real relationship. My first everything, really. I was 30 when we met, and I'd convinced myself that what I felt for other people, other men, was just confusion, admiration, friendship. Other men. The phrase settled into the space between us like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples in all directions. And now? I asked, echoing his question. Now I think I was lying to myself. We sat in silence, watching the light fade from the sky. The admission changed everything and nothing. It gave words to what I'd been feeling, but didn't make it any less complicated, any less dangerous. What does that mean for us? I asked. I don't know. I wish I did. A duck swam close to shore looking for food or just curious about the two men sitting so still on the bench. Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a granola bar, broke off pieces to throw into the water. I used to come here with Claire sometimes, he said. When we were first married, she'd bring bread for the ducks even though the signs say not to feed them. She always was a rule breaker. In small ways, yeah. It's one of the things I love about her. She has this certainty about what's right and wrong that I envy sometimes. And what do you think she'd say about this? About us sitting here? Daniel was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Finally, I think she'd be hurt and confused, and she'd want to know why I needed something she couldn't give me. Do you know why? Maybe, but I don't think I'm ready to say it out loud yet. I understood. There were things I'd been thinking, feelings I'd been having that felt too large and dangerous to give voice to. Sometimes the act of naming something made it real in ways you couldn't take back. We should probably go, I said as the park lights began to flicker on. Probably. But again, neither of us moved. It was becoming a pattern with us. The reluctance to end conversations, to return to our separate lives where we had to pretend this connection didn't exist. Marcus, Daniel said, his voice soft in the gathering darkness. Whatever this is, whatever happens, I want you to know that these conversations, these moments, they've meant something to me, more than I know how to explain. They've meant something to me too. Even if we never figure out what to do about it? Even then. We walked back to our cars in comfortable silence, but as I was getting into mine, Daniel called my name. Yes? Would it be okay if I kept calling, even if we can't meet like this again? You don't have to ask permission for that. Don't I? He had a point. We were past the stage where these calls could be explained as casual family connection. We both knew what they were now, even if we couldn't say it. Call me whenever you want, I said. I'll always answer. That night, I lay awake thinking about the way he'd looked at me when he'd talked about other men, about the careful distance he maintained between what he felt and what he allowed himself to acknowledge. I thought about Claire, about the trust she'd placed in me, about the way she'd asked me to check on her husband because she couldn't imagine any scenario where that might be complicated. I thought about the life I'd built, safe, predictable, uncomplicated, and how it suddenly felt like a prison I'd constructed for myself. Most of all, I thought about the way Daniel's presence beside me had felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. The phone rang 3 nights later. I can't stop thinking about what I told you, Daniel said without preamble. About other men. What about it? I've never said that out loud before, to anyone. How does it feel? Terrifying and relieving, like I've been holding my breath for years and can finally exhale. I knew that feeling. The exhaustion of constant self-monitoring, of making sure every word, every gesture, every expression stayed within acceptable boundaries. What happens now? I don't know, but I keep thinking about something you said, about the difference between going through the motions and feeling something real. What about it? I think I've been going through the motions my whole life, even with Claire, especially with Claire. The admission hung heavy between us. I could hear the guilt in his voice, the confusion of loving someone while questioning everything you thought you knew about yourself. That doesn't mean what you have with her isn't real, I said carefully. Doesn't it, if I've been pretending to be someone I'm not? I don't think you've been pretending. I think you've been trying to fit yourself into a shape that seemed right at the time. And what if that shape never really fit? It was a dangerous question, one that led down paths neither of us was ready to explore fully, but it was also an honest one, and honesty had become the currency of our conversations. Then maybe it's time to figure out what shape does fit. With you? The question was so quiet I almost missed it, so loaded with possibility and fear that I felt my chest tighten. I don't know, maybe, if you want that. I want that more than I should. Then maybe wanting it is enough for now. Is it enough for you? I thought about the question seriously. Was it enough to know that he felt something for me that he couldn't fully name or act on? Was it enough to exist in the space between friendship and something more, never quite crossing the line but always aware of its presence? It has to be, I said finally. For now. We talked for another hour about nothing important and everything essential, about the books we'd read, the places we'd traveled, the dreams we'd had as children. Normal conversation that felt weighted with the knowledge that we were sharing parts of ourselves we rarely showed to anyone. When we finally hung up, I realized I'd been smiling for the last half hour, not because anything had been resolved, but because talking to Daniel felt like the most natural thing in the world, even when, especially when, we were discussing the most complicated aspects of our lives. October arrived with a sudden drop in temperature and the kind of brilliant foliage that made the city feel like a postcard. Claire's travel schedule intensified, and with it the frequency of Daniel's calls. We developed a rhythm, him calling late, us talking until one or both of us got too tired to continue, hanging up with the promise of next time, even though we never scheduled these conversations. She's in Portland until Friday, he told me one Wednesday night. How are you handling it? Better than I expected. I used to hate when she traveled. The house felt too empty, too quiet. But now I look forward to the quiet, to having space to think, to being able to call you without having to explain who I'm talking to. Do you think she'd be upset about the calls? I think she'd be confused more than upset. She'd want to understand why I need something from you that I don't get from her. And what would you tell her? That's the problem. I don't know how to explain it. How do you tell someone that another person understands parts of you that you're just discovering yourself? It was a question I'd been grappling with too. How do you explain that someone's voice in the darkness feels more intimate than physical presence? How do you describe the way another person can see straight through to parts of yourself you've spent years hiding? Maybe you don't have to explain it, I said. Maybe some connections don't fit into categories people recognize, but they still exist. They still exist. The weekend Claire returned from Portland, they had dinner at my parents' house. It was my mother's birthday, and she'd requested family only, just the four of us around the table like old times. I almost declined. The thought of sitting across from Daniel and Claire, pretending that nothing had changed, seemed unbearable. But Mom had been looking forward to it for weeks, and I couldn't disappoint her. Daniel arrived wearing a navy sweater that made his eyes look almost gray. He brought flowers for my mother and a bottle of wine that he must have chosen carefully because it was exactly the kind she preferred. Claire was radiant, full of stories from her business trip, her hand finding Daniel's naturally as she talked. I watched them together and felt the familiar twist in my chest. Not quite jealousy, but something more complex. A recognition that they belonged to each other in ways I could never compete with, coupled with the knowledge that Daniel had been calling me every night she was gone. During dinner, in the middle of Claire's story about landing a major client, Daniel caught my eye across the table. It was just a moment, barely noticeable to anyone else, but in that glance I saw everything we'd shared in those late-night conversations. The weight of unspoken words, the careful distance we maintained even as we drew closer to something we couldn't name. Later, as we cleared dishes, I found myself alone in the kitchen with Daniel, while Claire and Mom looked through photo albums in the living room. "Good trip?" I asked, focusing on loading the dishwasher. "For her, yes, she's happy." "And for you?" He handed me a plate, our fingers brushing briefly. "I missed our conversations." "Daniel, I know it's complicated, but I can't pretend it doesn't matter." Before I could respond, Claire appeared in the doorway. "Are you two talking about me?" she asked, laughing. I could hear my name. "Just saying how much you love your work," Daniel said smoothly, moving to put his arm around her waist. "Too much, probably, but someone has to keep us in coffee and rent money." She looked between us with the easy affection of someone who had no reason to suspect anything. "I'm so glad you two get along. It means everything to me." That night, after they left, I sat in my parents' kitchen and tried to imagine what it would feel like to confess everything to Claire, to tell her that her husband called me when he couldn't sleep, that we'd had dinner together, that we met in parks and talked about things he couldn't share with her. I couldn't imagine it, couldn't see any version of that conversation that didn't end with her being hurt beyond repair, but I also couldn't imagine stopping. Daniel had become essential to me in ways I was only beginning to understand. 2 weeks later, everything changed. Part 2. The phone didn't ring that night, or the next. By the third night, I found myself checking to make sure the ringer was on, that I hadn't somehow missed his call. But the silence stretched on, punctuated only by the usual sounds of my apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock on my kitchen wall, the distant murmur of traffic. On Friday, Claire called. "Daniel's been working late all week," she said, her voice tired. "Some big project with a deadline. I've barely seen him." "That sounds stressful." "It is, for both of us. I keep offering to bring him dinner at the office, but he says he's too busy to stop even for that." She paused. "I'm worried about him, Marcus. He seems distant lately, more than usual." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Distant how?" "I don't know. Like he's somewhere else even when he's sitting right next to me. Last night I asked him what he was thinking about and he just said work, but—" She trailed off. "Maybe I'm imagining things. The travel schedule has been crazy lately. We're both exhausted." "I'm sure that's all it is." "Maybe you could call him, check in. You're probably the only person he'd actually talk to if something was bothering him." The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. "Claire, I don't think—" "Please, just as a favor to me? I know he respects your opinion." After we hung up, I stared at my phone for 20 minutes before finally dialing his number. It went straight to voicemail. "It's me," I said after the beep. "Claire asked me to check on you. Call me back when you can." He didn't. Saturday night, I broke my own rule and called again. This time, he answered on the fourth ring. "Marcus." His voice was flat, careful. "You didn't call me back." "I know." Are you all right? I'm fine. Daniel, what's going on? Claire said you've been working late, but, I haven't been working late. The words came out in a rush, like he'd been holding them in too long. I've been driving around the city, sitting in coffee shops, going to movies alone, anything to avoid going home and pretending everything is normal. Why? Because I can't stop thinking about you. Because every conversation we've had is playing on repeat in my head, and I don't know what to do about it. His voice cracked slightly. Because I think I'm falling in love with you, and that's not something I can take back. The admission hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we should cross. I felt my chest tighten, felt the careful walls I'd built around this situation begin to crumble. Daniel, I know it's impossible. I know it changes nothing. But I needed to say it out loud, at least once. Where are you? In my car, parked outside a Starbucks downtown. I've been here for 2 hours. Come over. Marcus, we can't. Just come over. We need to talk. There was a long pause, then, she's away this weekend, in Denver for her cousin's wedding. She wanted me to come, but I said I had too much work. And? And I keep thinking about that thing you said, about how silence isn't always empty. Daniel, can I come over? The narrator doesn't answer. The line stays open, both of us breathing into the phone, suspended in the moment before everything changes. Yes, I said finally. Come over. He arrived 40 minutes later, standing on my doorstep like someone seeking sanctuary. His hair was disheveled, his jacket wrinkled like he'd been wearing it for days, but his eyes were clear, focused on my face with an intensity that made my breath catch. I'm here, he said unnecessarily. I can see that. We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving to close the distance between us. The hallway felt charged, electric with possibility and fear. We don't have to do anything, I said. We can just talk. I know. But once you come in, we can't pretend this is still just friendship. I stopped pretending that weeks ago. I stepped back and he followed me inside. The door closed behind us with a soft click that sounded like a decision being made. My apartment looked different with Daniel in it. Smaller somehow, but also more complete. He took in the details, the books stacked on every available surface, the coffee mug I'd left on the counter, the jazz record I'd put on earlier still spinning softly on the turntable. You always keep things this quiet? He asked, settling onto the couch. Only when I'm afraid to say something out loud. What are you afraid to say? I sat down beside him, careful to maintain distance even as every instinct pulled me closer. That I've been falling in love with you, too, for months. Maybe since that first phone call. He closed his eyes like the words were a physical relief. I thought I was going crazy, imagining things that weren't there. They're there? What do we do now? I didn't have an answer. We sat in the dim light of my living room, jazz playing softly in the background, two men who had found something in each other that neither had been looking for. The space between us felt both vast and insignificant. A few inches that might as well have been an ocean, but also a distance that could be closed with the slightest movement. I made tea, I said eventually, needing something to do with my hands. I'd like that. In the kitchen, I went through the familiar motions of boiling water, selecting cups, finding the honey Daniel preferred, even though I'd never told him I'd noticed that detail, normal domestic actions that felt weighted with significance. When I returned, Daniel had moved to the floor, his back against the couch, legs stretched out in front of him. It was such a casual gesture, but it spoke of comfort, of someone who felt at home in my space. I handed him his cup and settled beside him on the carpet, close enough to feel his warmth, but not touching. The record had finished, leaving us in the kind of complete silence that had become precious to both of us. This feels dangerous, Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. It is dangerous. But you don't want me to leave. No, I don't want you to leave. We drank our tea in silence, both of us hyper-aware of every small sound. The clink of ceramic against ceramic, the soft intake of breath, the rustle of fabric when one of us shifted position. The ordinary intimacy of sharing space, sharing silence, sharing the weight of unspoken desire. Claire thinks I've been distant, Daniel said finally. Have you been? Yes, because being present with her means lying about what I'm feeling, and I'm tired of lying. What happens when she comes back? I don't know. I can't keep pretending, but I also can't hurt her. She doesn't deserve any of this. None of us deserve this. Don't we? Maybe this is exactly what we deserve. Maybe this is what happens when you spend your whole life trying to be what other people need instead of figuring out what you actually want. I thought about that, about all the choices I'd made based on other people's expectations, all the times I'd chosen safety over authenticity. The job I'd taken because it was stable rather than fulfilling. The relationships I'd pursued because they made sense on paper. The careful, quiet life I'd built because it didn't require me to examine too closely what I actually wanted. What do you want, Daniel? He set down his teacup, turned to look at me directly. I want to be honest for once in my life. I want to stop performing the version of myself that everyone expects to see. And what does that look like? I don't know yet, but I think it starts with admitting that what I feel for you is real, that it matters, that it's changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. The confession settled between us like something fragile and precious. I wanted to reach for him, to close the distance that felt both protective and torturous. Instead, I stayed where I was, letting the moment exist in its own space. It's changed me too, I said. How? I used to think I was content with my life. The teaching, the apartment, the routine, I told myself that contentment was enough. But then you started calling and I realized I'd been settling for a kind of half-life, going through the motions without ever really feeling anything. And now? Now I feel everything, all the time, and it's terrifying and wonderful and impossible. We talked until dawn, moving from the floor to the couch as the hours passed, our bodies gravitating toward each other in increments. A shifted leg, a brushed shoulder, the careful space between us shrinking without either of us acknowledging it. We didn't kiss, didn't cross that final line. But the night felt more intimate than any physical encounter I'd ever had. The way Daniel looked at me when he talked about his fears, the way his voice dropped to almost nothing when he said my name, the way we both seemed to understand that once certain boundaries were crossed, there would be no going back. When the first light began filtering through my windows, Daniel stirred beside me on the couch where we'd both dozed fitfully. I should go, he said, but he didn't move. Should you? Claire gets back this evening. I need to figure out what I'm going to say to her. What are you going to say? I don't know. The truth, maybe, or some version of it. He sat up, ran his hands through his hair. In the morning light, I could see the exhaustion in his face, the weight of months of internal struggle. Danielle, I said, and he turned to look at me. Whatever happens, with Claire, with us, I want you to know that last night meant something to me, more than I know how to say. It meant something to me, too. Even if we can't do this again, especially if we can't do this again. After he left, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the evidence of our night together. 2 empty teacups, the record we'd listened to, the indent in the couch cushion where his body had been. The space felt hollow without him, like an echo of something that had been there and was now gone. I knew we'd crossed a line. Not physically, but emotionally. We'd moved from the realm of possibility into something real and immediate and dangerous. There would be consequences, there would be pain. But there would also be the memory of Daniel's voice in the darkness, the weight of his presence beside me, the knowledge that for one night at least we'd been completely honest with each other. It would have to be enough. But I already knew it wouldn't be. The next few weeks passed in a strange kind of suspended animation. Daniel didn't call. I didn't expect him to, but I found myself hoping anyway, checking my phone more often than I cared to admit. Claire seemed happier when I saw her at Sunday dinner. She mentioned that Daniel had been more present, more attentive since her return from Denver. I think he worked through whatever was bothering him, she said, helping Mom clear the dishes. He seems like himself again. I nodded and made appropriate responses, but I was thinking about the cost of Daniel being himself again, the careful performance of being the husband Claire needed, the burial of whatever he'd discovered about himself during our long night of conversation. 3 weeks after he'd come to my apartment, I ran into him at the grocery store. He was in the produce section, examining avocados with the kind of intense focus people use when they're trying not to think about something else. "Marcus." He looked up, startled. "I didn't expect to see you here." "It's the closest store to my apartment." "Right. Of course." We stood there awkwardly, surrounded by pyramids of fruit and the mundane bustle of Saturday morning shoppers. He looked good, rested, more settled than the last time I'd seen him. But there were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. "How are you?" I asked. "I'm managing." "That doesn't sound like fine." "It's not fine, but it's what I can handle right now." An elderly woman pushed past us, muttering about people who blocked the aisles. We moved aside automatically, but the interruption seemed to break whatever spell had held us in place. "I should go," Daniel said. "Claire's making dinner. She's trying this new recipe she found online." "Of course." He started to leave, then turned back. "Marcus?" "Yeah?" "I think about that night all the time." "So do I." "I wish." He stopped, shook his head. "It doesn't matter what I wish. It matters to me." That makes it harder, not easier. After he left, I wandered the aisles aimlessly, picking up things I didn't need and putting them back. The encounter had lasted less than 5 minutes, but it left me feeling raw, exposed. The careful distance I'd been trying to maintain felt suddenly inadequate. That evening, for the first time in weeks, my phone rang at midnight. "I couldn't sleep," Daniel said without preamble. I figured. She's right next to me, and I feel completely alone. "Daniel, I know I shouldn't be calling, but I needed to hear your voice." "What happened to managing?" "I lied. To you, to myself. I'm not managing anything. I'm drowning." I could hear the desperation in his voice, the carefully controlled facade finally cracking. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know. Something. Anything. Help me understand how to live with this." "I can't tell you that. I'm trying to figure it out myself." "Are you, or are you just waiting?" The question hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. Was I waiting? For what? For Daniel to leave Claire? For the situation to resolve itself? For permission to want something I'd already been wanting for months? What am I supposed to be waiting for? For me to be brave enough to choose what I want instead of what's expected of me? And what do you want? You know what I want. Say it. I want to wake up next to you. I want to have conversations that don't feel like I'm translating myself for someone else's consumption. I want to stop pretending that what we have is just friendship. Then stop pretending. It's not that simple, isn't it? She loves me, Marcus. She trusts me. She built her life around the assumption that I'm the person she married. And who did she marry? Someone who was trying so hard to be worthy of her that he forgot to figure out who he actually was. We talked for 2 hours that night. Not about solutions or plans, but about the impossible weight of wanting something you couldn't have, of loving someone in ways that didn't fit the categories the world provided. When we hung up, I realized something had shifted. The careful boundaries we'd maintained were dissolving, replaced by something raw and more urgent. We were moving toward a reckoning neither of us was prepared for, but which felt inevitable. The next morning, I made a decision that I knew was probably wrong but felt necessary anyway. I called Claire. "Want to have lunch?" I asked. "Just us?" "That sounds nice. Is everything okay?" "I just feel like we haven't talked much lately. Just the two of us." We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place where Claire could order elaborate coffee drinks and I could pretend to focus on my sandwich instead of the conversation I was dreading. She looked happy, relaxed in the way people do when their lives are going according to plan. She talked about work, about the vacation she and Daniel were planning for the spring, about the possibility of starting a family soon. "He's been different lately," she said, stirring sugar into her latte. "More present, more, I don't know how to describe it, like he's finally comfortable in his own skin." "That's good." "It is, for a while there. I was worried he was having some kind of midlife crisis. He seemed so restless, so dissatisfied, but whatever it was, I think he's worked through it. I nodded, feeling the weight of everything I couldn't tell her, the truth about where Daniel's restlessness had come from, about what he'd been working through and with whom. Claire, I said carefully, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever feel like you don't really know someone, even when you love them? She considered this, tilting her head in that way she'd done since childhood when wrestling with a complex idea. I think that's probably normal. People are complicated. We all have private thoughts, private struggles. But what if those private thoughts were about something fundamental, something that changed everything? Like what? I couldn't answer that question directly, couldn't be the one to plant seeds of doubt in her mind about her marriage. But I could see in her expression that my questions were making her uncomfortable, forcing her to examine certainties she'd preferred not to question. I don't know, I said finally. I've just been thinking about relationships lately, about how much we can really know about another person. Marcus, is everything all right? You seem troubled about something. I'm fine. Just having one of those philosophical moments. You always did overthink things. She smiled, but there was concern in her eyes. You know you can talk to me about anything, right? If something's bothering you. The irony was almost unbearable. I was the one person she couldn't talk to about the thing that was bothering me most. The one person who couldn't give her the honesty she was offering me. I know, I said. Thank you. That night, Daniel called again, and the night after that. What had been weekly conversations became nightly ones, each call lasting longer than the previous, each one pushing us further into territory we had no map for. We talked about everything and nothing, about the books we were reading, the dreams we'd had as children, the fears that kept us awake at night. But underneath every conversation was the weight of unfinished business, of feelings that had been acknowledged but not acted upon. I can't keep doing this, I said one night in November, 3 weeks after our lunch conversation, 2 months after the night he'd come to my apartment. Doing what? Talking to you like this, feeling like this, wanting things I can't have. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe we need to stop before someone gets hurt. Someone's already hurt. We both are. Then maybe we need to stop before someone else gets hurt. Claire. Yes, Claire. And what about us? There is no us, Daniel. There can't be. Because of Claire. Because of Claire, because of your marriage, because of what it would do to our family, because of a dozen reasons that should have stopped this before it started. But it did start. Then maybe it's time for it to end. The silence stretched between us, filled with everything we weren't saying. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice so quiet I almost missed it. If that's what you want. It's not what I want. It's what needs to happen. Okay. Okay. If you think it's best, then okay. Daniel. No, you're right. This isn't fair to anyone, least of all Claire. I'm sorry. So am I. We hung up and I immediately regretted everything I'd said. But I also knew I'd been right. We'd been moving towards something that would hurt everyone involved, and one of us had to be responsible enough to stop it. I thought that would be the end of it, that Daniel would respect my decision, that we'd return to the careful distance of family gatherings and polite conversation, that I'd eventually stop checking my phone every night at midnight, stop hoping for a call that wouldn't come. I was wrong. The call stopped, but everything else intensified. Daniel began showing up places where he knew I'd be. Not obviously, never in a way that would seem strange to anyone else, but with a frequency that couldn't be coincidental. At the coffee shop where I graded papers on Saturday mornings, at the bookstore where I browsed on weekends, at the park where I sometimes ran in the evenings. He never approached me directly, never pushed for conversation, but he was there, a presence in my peripheral vision, a reminder that whatever I thought I'd ended was still very much alive. It was psychological warfare of the gentlest kind, and it was working. After 2 weeks of this, I broke. What are you doing? I asked, cornering him outside the library where I'd spotted him 3 times in 5 days. Research, For work. Daniel, what do you want me to say, Marcus? That I'm following you around like some kind of stalker? That I can't seem to stay away even though you made it clear that's what you wanted? Is that what you're doing? Yes? Why? Because I miss you. Because those phone calls were the only time I felt like myself. Because ending this doesn't make what I feel for you go away. It has to go away. Does it? Or does it just get buried deeper until it poisons everything else? What are you asking me? I'm asking you to reconsider, to think about what we could have instead of just what we'd be losing. We'd be destroying Claire's life. We'd be giving ourselves a chance to be happy. At her expense. At everyone's expense if we don't. Do you think I'm happy pretending to be someone I'm not? Do you think she's happy with a husband who's in love with someone else? Are you in love with me? I didn't fall in love with you on purpose. But you did. Yes. The admission hung between us on the library steps, surrounded by the everyday sounds of college students and faculty going about their normal lives. People who didn't know that two men were having a conversation that would change everything. What do you want me to do with that information? I asked. I want you to admit that you're in love with me too. That doesn't change anything. It changes everything. Daniel, even if we both, it doesn't matter. You're married to my sister. There's no scenario where this works out without devastating the people we care about. There's no scenario where it works out without some pain. But there are scenarios where everyone eventually finds their way to something real instead of settling for something safe. You think Claire settled for something safe? I think Claire fell in love with someone who was trying so hard to be what she needed that neither of us bothered to ask if it was what either of us actually wanted. And what do you actually want? You. I want you. The words hit me like a physical force. I'd known, of course. We'd been dancing around this admission for months, but hearing it stated so plainly, so directly, stripped away all the careful pretense we'd maintained. I want you too, I said, because there was no point in pretending anymore. Then why are we fighting this? Because wanting something doesn't make it right. Since when do you care more about what's right than what's true? Since it stopped being just about us. It was never just about us, but it's not just about Claire either. A group of students passed by, laughing about something, their voices bright with the kind of carefree happiness that felt like a foreign language. I envied their simplicity, their ability to want things without calculating the cost to everyone around them. What are you suggesting? I asked. I'm suggesting that we stop pretending this is going away, that we figure out how to be honest about what we feel, even if it's complicated. Honest with whom? With each other, with Claire, with ourselves. You want to tell her? I want to stop lying to her. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Lying to her would be pretending I'm happy in a marriage that's built on me being someone I'm not. Being honest with her is giving her the chance to decide if she wants to be married to who I actually am. And who are you, actually? I don't know yet, but I know it starts with admitting that I'm in love with you. I stared at him, this man who had somehow become the center of my emotional life without either of us planning it. Who called me when he couldn't sleep, who understood my silences, who saw parts of me I'd kept hidden from everyone else. This is going to destroy everything, I said. Maybe. Or maybe it's going to save us all from a lifetime of pretending. That's a hell of a gamble. Isn't love always a gamble? I thought about that as we stood there, two men who had found something real in the most impossible circumstances, trying to figure out if the potential for happiness was worth the guaranteed pain of getting there. If we do this, I said finally, if we're honest about what this is, it changes everything, not just for us, but for our families, for everyone who knows us. Are you ready for that? Are you? I asked first. I'm ready to stop living a lie, even if the truth is messier. That's not the same thing as being ready for the consequences. Nothing could be worse than the way I feel right now, loving you and pretending I don't, being married to someone who deserves better than a husband who's in love with her brother. She deserves better than both of us. Maybe, but she deserves honesty more than she deserves our protection. I knew he was right, even as everything in me wanted to find another solution. Some way to make this work that didn't require anyone to get hurt, that didn't require me to be the person who helped destroy my sister's marriage. But there was no clean solution. There never had been. From the moment Daniel first called me in the middle of the night, we'd been moving toward this conversation, this choice, this moment when we'd have to decide between the safety of silence and the risk of truth. When? I asked. Soon, before I lose my nerve. Before we both lose our nerve. Are you sure about this? I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not just the man I'd fallen in love with, but the weight he'd been carrying, the cost of trying to be someone he wasn't for someone he cared about. I thought about Claire, about the conversation we'd have, about the pain it would cause, but I also thought about the pain of the alternative, years of careful distance, of buried feelings, of all of us settling for less than we deserved. No, I said, but I'm sure about you, about us, about the fact that this is the only honest choice we have left. Even if it ends badly, even then. That weekend, while I was grading papers and trying not to think about impending conversations, Daniel was making his own preparations. I know because he called me Sunday night to tell me he'd asked Claire if they could talk. When? I asked. Tomorrow, after work. I'm picking her up from the office. Do you know what you're going to say? Some version of the truth, that I'm not happy, that I haven't been honest about who I am or what I want, that I think we both deserve better than what we have. Are you going to tell her about me? I don't know. It depends on how the conversation goes. Daniel, I know it's not fair to leave you wondering, but I don't want to hurt her more than necessary. And if she asks directly, then I won't lie. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment and tried to imagine tomorrow evening. Daniel and Claire in his car, or maybe in their living room, having the conversation that would end their marriage. Claire's face when she realized that the distance she'd sensed hadn't been work stress or a midlife crisis, but something much more fundamental. I tried to imagine the phone call I'd get afterward, from Daniel telling me how it had gone, or from Claire asking questions I wasn't sure I could answer. I tried to imagine family dinners afterward, holidays, the careful navigation of relationships that had been torn apart and rebuilt in new configurations. Mostly, I tried to imagine living with the knowledge that I'd been part of something that had caused someone I loved real, lasting pain. But I also tried to imagine the alternative, years more of midnight phone calls, of careful distance at family gatherings, of watching Daniel slowly disappear under the weight of being someone he wasn't. Years of watching Claire love a version of her husband that didn't really exist, of building a life on a foundation that had cracks neither of them acknowledged. Neither future seemed bearable, but only one of them seemed honest. Monday passed in a haze of distraction. I taught my classes, went through the motions of normal life, but my mind was elsewhere, with Daniel and Claire having a conversation that would change everything. The call came at 9:47 p.m. It's over, Daniel said without preamble. How is she? Hurt, confused, angry. His voice was hollow, exhausted. She asked if there was someone else. What did you tell her? The truth, that there was someone I had feelings for, but that it wasn't about that it was about me not being honest about who I am. Did she ask who? Yes. And? I told her. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd known this moment was coming, had tried to prepare for it, but the reality was different than the anticipation. How did she react? She laughed, at first, like it was the most ridiculous thing she'd ever heard. Then she got quiet, really quiet, and then she started crying. Daniel, I'm so sorry. She said she felt like she didn't know either of us, that she'd trusted us both and we'd been lying to her for months. We weren't. We were, Marcus. Maybe not intentionally, but we were. Every family dinner where we pretended we were just in-laws. Every time she asked me what was wrong and I said nothing. Every time she asked you to check on me because she trusted you to care about her happiness. He was right. We had been lying, if not in action, then in omission. We'd allowed Claire to build her life on assumptions that weren't true, to make decisions based on information that was incomplete. What happens now? I'm staying in a hotel tonight. Tomorrow I'll start looking for an apartment. She wants me to move out as soon as possible. And us? Bah, si.